Chloe Rigby, Web Editor of Internet Retailing, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Consumer Retailer Frontier, What Consumers Expect and Email Strategies That Deliver, presented in association with Bronto Software. Over the next hour, we'll be hearing from Greg Zakowicz, Senior Commerce Marketing Analyst at Bronto, who will be exploring personalization in practice and across channels, where consumer expectations and retailer strategies align, where the divide exists, and he'll be providing strategic email marketing recommendations for closing the personalization gap. After that, we'll be answering questions in a Q&A session. So ahead of that, let me explain how to ask questions that you may have. On the control panel on your screen, you'll see a chat box. Write your question in that box and press send, and we'll aim to get to as many questions as we can today. Just to let you know that after the webinar finishes, we'll be sending out an email with the link so you can watch again whenever it's convenient for you. Before we start, let me tell you a little bit more about today's speaker. Greg Zakowicz has worked in email, mobile and social media marketing for 12 years, during which time he's provided commerce marketers, including many internet retailer top 1,000 clients, with in-depth analysis of their marketing programs, recommendations for improvement, best practice support and implementation guidance and execution. So let's get started. I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, Greg Zakowicz, Senior Commerce Marketing Analyst at Bronto Software. Greg, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Chloe, and thank you for the warm intro. Thanks, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I understand I'm standing between you and a 4-day weekend today, so hopefully I'll give you something to stew upon this weekend, and then come back next weekend ready to rock and roll. So before we get going today, I'm just going to ask one nice thing of you, and that's simply not to trade any Oracle stock based on anything I say today. And if we all stay out of jail, we'll all be in good shape at that point. So imagine yourself at a hotel and you're looking for some dinner reservations, and you walk downstairs to the concierge, and you walk up to the concierge and you let them know that you're looking for something with a surf and turf, maybe some crab legs and lobster tails as part of that. You'd like to drink a nice vintage Cabernet. Your wife likes to drink a nice vintage Chardonnay or a sparkling rosé. You want something a little more quiet, a little more dim lit of an atmosphere, nothing too raucous, but something very calm and casual. And the recommendation you get back is to visit the Hard Rock Cafe. Now, in this instance, you would certainly expect more from the concierge, right? But why? The concierge doesn't know you. They don't know if you're allergic to foods. They don't know if you like salty or sweet foods. They don't know what kind of dessert you like. They don't know anything about you. Right? But you expect that person who has known you for all of 1, maybe 2 minutes to provide a restaurant that you're going to love, right? But the reason you have those higher expectations and you expected more from them is because you provided some sort of info, and it could be very high level info, right? You don't tell them what your budget is. You don't tell them how much money you make. You don't tell them what kind of shoes or clothes you like to buy. You just give them some very surface, basic information and expect something very relevant in return. And this happens from a consumer-retailer relationship on a daily basis, right? Retailers are absorbing information as well as other places, social media sites, internet browsers, right? They're all absorbing some sort of information on consumers. And consumers nowadays, with mobile phones being so integrated into their purchasing decision, expect retailers to take that information and provide a more relevant experience. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Last year, Bronto commissioned 2 global omnibus studies, one of consumers and their shopping behaviors and habits around the world, another of retail executives from around the world. The data we're going to look at today is going to be UK-specific data based on those 2 global omnibus studies. And we're going to look at to see really what consumers expect from the retailers and what they expect them to provide for them. And then we'll look at the retailer side with some data points about what retailers have planned and where they think the most, what really they think consumers want, and see where the strategies align and see where there might be some missed opportunities there. And we're going to wrap up the presentation with some email strategies to provide consumers with what they want, understanding that you don't need to hire 12 additional email marketers to execute these things. These are all things that you can do with your current staff, regardless of how big or small it is. But small things sometimes matter a whole lot when it comes to this space. So that's the goal for today. But at first, I want to take a couple slides to really set expectations for what consumers want. So if consumers don't expect anything, like me going to the concierge, I had expectations, but if I walk down there with none, I would be pleasantly surprised with a hard rock recommendation, right? But do consumers think that retailers actually track their shopping habits? Because this is the crux of it. And you could probably guess based on the presentation what these answers is going to be. But for the most part, they do. So even though millennials, if you look at that, 61% have the conviction to say, yeah, I think they're tracking me, the no percentage is still small, right? So you still have this 39% there, but you have this don't know. Now, surprisingly, millennials, you would think, would assume that retailers track them, but they are also integrated into, they're more digitally native than other generations. If you look at Generation X and baby boomers, the older you get, the more you think you're being tracked. That could be more, paranoia on the part, or you just have a better grasp of what's happening from a technological to retailer integration standpoint. So the expectation overall is that, yes, retailers are tracking them. The next question that follows that is, well, if we think they're tracking them, what do we expect them to do with that information? This is really what come out on top, right? We look at things like free samples, provide promotions and discounts, right? People love promotions and discounts, and retailers have been providing those discounts seemingly higher and higher and keeping up with the Joneses year after year. And product recommendations also stand very high here. And we're going to talk about some of these things in more detail here in just a minute. But I also arrowed the bottom one, connecting the online and in-store experience, because this is going to come up a couple times during the presentation. We're not quite there from the retailer standpoint yet, right? Not everything is integrated. You walk into a store, they know your online behavior, but we are getting to that place, and consumers, whether it's realistic or not, are expecting that more and more. So we're going to talk about that just at a surface level a couple times in the presentation. But the thing to think about from that perspective is, if consumers are expecting it, they also expect their retailers to provide it, right? And that's the slippery slope here. Now, this is all about, hey, the consumer is doing something, right? They're willing to give data up, or they're giving data up unbeknownst to them, but they expect something in return. Would they willingly give up data to get something in return? And that skews even more, right? Yes, I will give up my data if you give me a customized or an incentive or some sort of promotion, right? People like promotions, they like discounts. The same thing goes for product recommendations. Sure, I'll give up my info as long as you make product recommendations that are more relevant to me, right? That's the concierge example there. Sure, I'll give you some personal details about myself, but give me something in return. So consumers, while they might not like it, they are willing to sacrifice, and they're willing to bend a little bit, say, sure, I'll give up some data as long as I get something in return. Now, when it comes to product recommendations, the satisfaction of those recommendations have a lot of room to be desired, right? So here is the counterintuitive to millennials think at a lower percentage that they're being tracked, but they also are more satisfied with recommendations than other generations. But there's still a lot of room for improvement from a recommendation standpoint. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Recommendations, especially from an email standpoint, have been around for quite many years, right? But the technology and aggregating and the types of data they're aggregating and processing that data, technology has caught up to what we can do. We can provide pretty relevant recommendations for most people nowadays, but the implementation of those has been somewhat slow. So these are just a couple slides for really looking at a baseline for what consumers at a high level are expecting, right? They're expecting promotions. They're expecting their experience to be a little more customized based on the fact that they expect retailers to track them. Now, that goes for online and in-store, but in-store certainly has its own set of expectations and unique challenges to it. So if there's anyone online with brick and mortar stores, or thinking about pop-up shops or moving into the brick and mortar space, it comes into some different challenges, right, in different ways consumers shop. So imagine yourself walking into a store, say you're shopping for a pair of jeans, and all of a sudden you reach into your pocket, you reach into your purse, and you pull out your phone. Think about what you're doing with your phone at that point, right? What are you doing with it? What are you actually opening up while you're shopping for jeans doing? And here's a litany of reasons that are things you could be doing with your phone. And I don't expect you to read all these. The fact of the matter is, here's what people do most often, right? Regardless of generations, right? They're doing the same thing, but looking up product information. It's number one across all generations, right? They're doing the same things. They're just doing them to different degrees based on the age of the audience here. At the end of the day, what you're looking at here is people are using their phones to look up and digest content, They're looking for something to help inform their purchase decision. Now, this holds true online as well, right? So people are going to comparative shop. They're going to look at product reviews online when they're shopping. And if they're in the brick and mortar store, they're certainly doing that as well. It's all about providing content that's relevant and helps the consumer make a purchasing decision when they're in store. So there's Jeff Fromm, who's a millennial marketing expert, uses the term just-in-time content for a just-in-time buyer. When you're in that store, you are a just-in-time buyer. You're shopping for something. They're searching for that just-in-time content. Now, since consumers are expecting retailers to track them, they're also expecting to use their phones in store, and they're using their phones in store. They also have that expectation of, hey, do we want stores to do more to give us a more personalized experience when we're in store? And of course, people say yes, right? Yes, they want a better shopping experience. That's really what it comes down to. They want brands to do more just to provide a better experience. Now, the question ultimately becomes from a retailer standpoint is, well, what is that more? What do we provide our consumers at that point? So looking at the omnibus results from the UK, when it comes to retail executives and what they want to give more, this is where they think they can impact the in-store sales the most. And top to bottom, we're going to look at these three in a little more detail and compare them to what consumers think. But in-store Wi-Fi, right, to help the shopping and price comparison. We saw consumers are certainly doing that when they're in store. Interactive spaces, right, that's a trend that's coming up with dressing rooms and smart mirrors and things of that such. And then equipping sales associates with tablets for real-time product info. And this is an intriguing topic to me, and I think something we'll see more of. And I'm going to talk about this here in just a minute here. And then you can see some of the lower things here. So for the most part, you would look at this and say, from a retailer standpoint, if I have brick and mortars, this makes sense to me. It provides a better experience. People are using phones. But let's look at this into just a little more detail to see if consumers actually want these things and how much they actually might want them. So number one, in-store Wi-Fi. And this is what consumers think about this. The fact is, Wi-Fi is just not that important when it comes to shopping in store, right? Think about yourself. You walk into a store, you sit down at a cafe, and you go to open your phone, and there's no free Wi-Fi. What do you think to yourself? They don't have free Wi-Fi here. It's more of an expectation nowadays. Now, there are certain places like airports, hotels, where you might not expect the Wi-Fi to be free for you, or you might have to jump through a hurdle to get it. But the fact is, Wi-Fi is just not that important when it comes to shopping because they're not streaming Netflix movies when they're shopping, right? They're looking up content. So the data usage is not really that big and not much of a hurdle. They're still going to use their phone. They're just using their data plans for it. And most data plans nowadays, people have things where they have plenty of data to look up product reviews or to look up testimonials or whatever they might do at that point. So now there might be implications from the retailer side to say, hey, well, Wi-Fi is a bigger long-term play for us, right? We have the Wi-Fi, which if they connect, we can maybe connect to our app and we can streamline the in-store and online experience a little bit better. And that's absolutely true. From a short-term impact on sales, it's probably very moot or minimal at that point. So retailers think this is going to have the largest impact on driving sales, and I don't see that. And the consumers don't seem to hold that same premonition either. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think the Wi-Fi connection from blending the in-store to the online still has a little bit of room for improvement, and that's going to be more of a midterm play. Now, the second most popular reason is those interactive spaces and dressing rooms. And of course, no one wants to go to store shopping for a pair of jeans and not have a dressing room to try those jeans on. It doesn't make any sense. So of course, dressing rooms are important. But if you think about the way consumers shop now, if I go in store and I like this pair of jeans, but they don't have my size, what do? I hop on my phone, I order the pair of jeans from that retailer online, and it ships to my house. I don't necessarily need to try on the jeans at that point. So, dressing rooms are certainly important. Do I think smart mirrors are going to be in every dressing room over the next 2 years in every store? No, I don't. I think it's going to be more of a niche play, maybe 15 even 10 years down the road, you might see more of it or more interaction. But I don't see this as being a short-term fix for sales. Maybe some high-end luxury retailers or something in that middle tier might implement these more. But from a gross implementation standpoint, I don't think it's going to happen that quickly, and I don't think consumers care that much, at least from the get-go. And then number 3 for retailers was equipping sales associates. right? And this is a little bit more important for consumers, which makes a lot of sense, right? So consumers are using their phones to look up product info, to get and inform their purchase decision when they're in store. But what happens when they don't get the info or they can't find the info they're looking for? They go to the sales associate, right? But think about it. If they're using their phones and they can't find the info, they expect a sales associate with no tablets or no info just to know the information off the top of their head. It doesn't make sense. So equipping sales associates makes a lot of sense. Now, interestingly here, millennials think it's more important than the rest of generations. Remember, millennials, they don't like to talk, they don't socialize, they can't complete sentences, they can't write, they're glued to their phones, they're antisocial, they don't like going to stores. They want the help the most. And it makes a lot of sense though. They're used to getting information they're looking for, but when they don't have it, they want to get it. So I think this is going to be more important. I think this probably does have a higher impact on sales because it plays into the overall customer experience. If I can't find the information, do self-service, I'm going to ask for help. And I want that help when I ask for it to be solved for me. It's a customer experience standpoint. And it also makes sense from a retailer standpoint where if I call your customer service department and I'm talking to someone on the phone, that person's not staring at a blank wall talking to me. They have a computer in front of them. They're looking at the information. Why does the person in store not have the same benefit and the same tools as the person on your call center? It's a face of your organization at that point. They're a salesperson. So, this is something where, Target is getting into this, but more brick and mortar retailers, I think you'll see this over the next couple of years just to provide a better in-store experience. And then I threw another one up here because promotions and discounts, right? We saw people love promotions and discounts, and when they're shopping in store, this is also important for people. No one's going to turn away paying less for a product if they have the opportunity, but this is important for consumers as well. So retailers need to think about this, not for the standpoint of, hey, we need to provide discounts when people come in store, but think about how you're messaging, especially from an email and social standpoint, right? Focus less on the discounts, focus more on the value the brand brings. And this is more of a long-term play for you, but if you focus more on why people should shop with you and what you stand for and causes or whatever you might have going there, your brand value, you lessen the need to actually promote or discount products. And then two other things which are really no-brainers for you, but no one walks into a store that says, hey, I hope the jeans I'm looking for are not in stock today. And then when I do find the jeans, if they happen to be in stock, I want to wait in a really long line to check out, right? These are no-brainers. So you might say, well, Greg, why are you putting these up here for us to see? Well, the reason is this just ties into the overall experience, right? Customers want a smooth, seamless experience when they're doing shopping. It doesn't matter if they're shopping online or in store. They want that. If you think about Amazon, Amazon is eating US retailers' lunch. They're moving into Australia, and pretty soon they'll be doing the same thing. They're starting to expand even more in Canada, right? Amazon's all over the place. They're global. They're in the UK and they're doing very well over there. But think about what Amazon provides. They take all the conveniences of in-store shopping. So, hey, I buy a product when I'm in store. I get to take it home with me, right? And they try to do that. Hey, here's 2-hour delivery. Here's 2-day delivery, right? All the things that are cumbersome, like waiting in lines and ease of checkout. They've streamlined their checkout process. They've taken those hurdles and they've tried to implement it from an online standpoint. So this is where in-store retailers really have an opportunity to, at the time being, because I think Amazon is moving into the brick and mortar space, but to have a leg up on Amazon, right? You can come into our store, you can buy it, and you can take it home today. You don't need to wait 2 hours. You don't need to wait 2 days, but this bodes to the overall experience. So we're looking at consumer expectations. We know they're expecting retailers to provide more for them, provide better recommendations, provide discounts, provide samples, whatever they want to do. Retailers are looking at streamlining the in-store experience and what consumers want. But some other business priorities and really where retailers think they're executing well and not executing well come into play here as well. So highest potential to improve sales or profits. And this is not just an in-store, this is just the business overall. And here's what we see from a retailer perspective, right? The website, the mobile experience, and the coordinated e-com, in-store and e-com. And that's something that, again, is resonating. We saw consumers are expecting that more. Retailers see this on the horizon. Now, interestingly, from a UK perspective, number 2, marketing channel attribution. This is something that is ranked pretty high in the UK. We don't see it in the US. We don't see it in Canada. We didn't see it in Australia ranked this high either in these reports. It's very unique that UK has it so high, but it's kind of cool, right? Because retailers are certainly trying to figure out, hey, is social a better avenue for me or than paid search? How is email stacking up to our marketing channels? So being able to figure out where your customers are and how they're interacting is important for driving sales. So I actually applaud the UK retailers who are looking at this and saying, hey, if we better know how to target our customers, we can drive more sales. So we're going to look at this in a minute, but I want to look at the top two of the top three here, which are really about the experience, because that's what we're talking about today, providing a better experience, website and mobile experience. Of course, I would absolutely agree these should be top two, if not both in the top three here, which they are. But when we ask retailers in the UK how satisfied they are in these areas, it's so-so, right? Online experience, 73%, and then you have some neutral. You don't have a lot of unsatisfied, which is great, but the mobile experience under 70%, right? We are living in 2018. I always say if you're not mobile optimized, you're not optimized. Now, it makes sense mobile would be a little bit lower than the online because mobile experience has been around just for a shorter period of time than the online, but people are interacting with every channel on their phone more and more. So certainly moving forward through 2018, look at every place you have email marketing, social marketing, all these different places, and try to make that mobile experience better. Certainly a checkout process, right? That ease of checkout that consumers have shown they wanted should be baked into those things. So there's certainly some room for improvement from retailers. And I would certainly go through and audit your own sites if you haven't done it in a while, and try to buy something online and see how, and try to buy something on your phone and see how easy and frictionless it actually is, and try to remove those friction points. And then these other things with personalization, they're pretty spread out here from a UK perspective. But personalization matters because that's really the whole crux of the presentation today, right? Consumers are expecting that personalization. We're talking about data, and this really comes down to, hey, how do we collect data? How do we absorb data? And how do we output data that is relevant to the consumer? And that's really what it's about. It's understanding customer preferences. And retailers are a little bit less convicted here, right? Hey, we're okay with understanding customer preferences, right? But using the preferences is even less. And from an email standpoint, or even maybe online marketing in general, it's not surprising, right? Because we have probably your email team has one or two people in it, maybe one or two graphic designers. It's not a huge team in most companies, right? So it's easy for me to create 50 to 100 segments. I could do that in probably an hour, but I can't execute on 50 to 100 segments, especially if I'm sending emails on a daily basis. I don't have the creative department to do it. I don't have the copywriting department to do it. So emails and email marketers have to really work within their limits. And that's probably why you see the use of personalization so much lower, because they just don't have the teams to do it. Now, when we talk about email marketing here in just a minute, I'm going to give you tools where your team can do that, can provide relevance without needing those extra resources. This ultimately all comes down to sending the right message at the right time, the right channel. It's that proverbial right. So from a UK retailer standpoint, can they consistently send via the right message all the time? And it's about 50-50, right? A little bit more than always. Now, I am signed up for hundreds of email programs, Australia, US, Canada, UK, right? I will tell you 55% of the time in the UK, those messages are not relevant to me. It's not the right message, right? A lot of it is batch and blast messaging, maybe a little bit segmentation sprinkled here and there, which is certainly appreciated, but for the most part, it's not. And that's not a dig on people. Again, email departments are strapped with resources for the most part, so you need to do more with less. So that's not surprising at all. And that's pretty consistent with the other stats we see from around the world as well. The right time, even less so. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Timing varies and people have different lives. For me, 7 to 9 o'clock at night is a black hole because I'm giving my kids a bath and I'm reading them books and I'm putting them to bed, right? But for someone who doesn't have any kids, 7 to 9 might be the perfect time to buy. So it's really hard for retailers to execute. I think you want to do the things that you can do the best, right? If your email service provider has send time optimization opportunities like Brownto does, right? You let the system figure out when the people are opening their emails and you send those emails at a time when it's most relevant to them. It's going to be top of their email inbox. It's going to be most likely to be open. Use the automated tools available to you. And then, of course, the right channel. Surprisingly, the right channel is higher than the right time. In a lot of the other countries, we see it just slowly degrades. But this is not surprising to me because we saw that a couple slides ago that UK retailers are really focused on channel attribution. They're focused on where people are interacting. That's a great thing, right? So they're more comfortable with, hey, we should, if they abandon a basket here, do we send them a basket abandoned email, or do we retarget them on social or retarget them on search ads, right? They're getting a better concept of where and how those consumers are interacting, so they're able to better target them via the right channel. There's certainly room for improvement, and consumer behavior is changing and is always going to change as new technologies and new social media platforms and ways of interacting come up. But it's actually a positive sign to see here that the right channel is having such a focus in the UK. So I certainly applaud that. So that's some of the retailer data and the consumer data and where those things align. At the end of the day, we're looking at personalization. Retailers know they need to provide personalization. Consumers want personalization. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about 4 specific email strategies, knowing that you have, I'm going to assume you might have a larger team, which is even better for you. You can implement and turn these things around quicker, but assuming you have somewhat limited resources to provide small, sometimes medium-sized projects that can have a big bang for the buck here. So the first one, I'm going to start with the welcome messaging strategy. And I would hope everyone online has a welcome message. So when new signs up to your email program, it sends out there and welcomes into the program, really reinforces your branding, helps them get information they need to make a purchase, right? Because they are interested in you at that time. But here's where that strategy often stops. It stops at best practices, right? And I love best practices because they work, but they're not an endpoint for you. And here's the example. Why do I have 2 people on the screen here? Does an 18-year-old female and a 45-year-old male who've signed up for your email program, do they get the same message? If the answer is yes, that message can't be relevant to both of them at the same time. They're 2 different people in different stages of life and different genders, and they probably live and have different incomes and different living dynamics and cost dynamics and all these things. Yet too many times we just say, hey, welcome to our email program, and there's no customization. Yet consumers are giving you tons of information when they sign up for your email program. So there's 2 things to consider here. One is considering the source of the acquisition. And what I mean by this is if a person's on your website and say you sell clothing, right? So you have a maternity section and someone signs up while viewing maternity products, that person probably has a very different need, or they're shopping for something very different than the person signing up for men's sandals or men's shoes, right? Different genders, different products, right? Why should a person who signed up on the maternity page not get something a little more maternity driven, right? It can be top selling maternity clothes or something like that versus the male who's looking for some shoes at that point. They're giving you tons of information when they sign up, and you can easily just track that and then split a customized message or the entire welcome series more driven down toward the acquisition point. And here's an example from ASOS. If they ask for male, female when you sign up, and if you sign up, say, hey, I'm a female, you get one version of a message. For the men, you get a different one. You can see some of the subtle changes, different hero images, different text, even different navigation bar up there. But the content mostly remains the same. And here's a very simplified version. You don't need to come up with 100 versions of that message. You can start with implement one, see how it goes, implement a second, but fine tune these things as you go. Now, the second strategy there is click-based, right? So say you have your current welcome message. It's one message. It goes to everyone. Great. I get the message and I click on the maternity link in your navigation bar. That can dictate the next message I get, or it can help dictate product recommendations or hard-coded recommendations in there. So maybe the second message is the same, but hey, top-rated maternity gear over here, where I have some men's shoes on the second message the other way. So they're telling you a lot of things based on their actions and based on where they're coming in that can help you dictate messaging. And here's what that could look like in a real life example. So here's a company in the US called Tackle Direct. They sell fishing gear, saltwater fishing, fly fishing. They even sell some boating products. So here's a welcome message on the left. The message to the right is the second message in the welcome series. Hey, reasons you'll love shopping with us. Not a bad message, really designed to brand the company and provide some differentiation between customers. But the person looking for saltwater deep sea fishing has very different needs than the person who's doing flat water fly fishing, right? There's different products, there's different things that go into that. So they said, hey, we've got 2 saltwater links in our message right here, navigation bar and one of these hero images there. So why don't we take anyone who clicks on that and we'll send them a different second message. And this is what that second message looks like. And I truncated it down, but certainly it's very different, right? It's much more sales oriented. It's much more direct. But again, people sign up on the site. They got to the site. They were intrigued enough to sign up. They get the welcome message. They then open the message. They click the message. All these data points that they are doing and engaging with this brand. And they're going to send them a second message and say, hey, we know you're interested in saltwater. Here are some of our favorite saltwater products. All right. How much can relevance matter? It can matter a lot, right? Look at the personalized message. So you can see there's positive lifts all over the place. Revenue per email, almost 8,000 times better than the standard second message. But the bottom 2 bullet points are the best, right? The volume of emails as customized message sent is 3% of the generic message, yet it's driven 140% more revenue, right? And it's an automated message. It doesn't require you to go in every day and batch send these things. You set the message up one time, you automate it one time, and it runs on the back end. You check out behaviors. Now, the great thing is you can add these things as you go. You can be satisfied with just one, but it's providing a little bit more of a relevant experience to the consumer, and the consumers appreciate that. The second strategy is browser recovery messaging. So here's something where, this is an example. A customer goes to your website, they browse around, they don't actually cart a product, but they leave without buying, right? You're capturing all that browsing data they're doing at that point, and you can automate, assuming they're an email subscriber, you can automate messages to go off to these people based on specific products or specific categories of products they're viewing, and certainly set some business rules here. But think about that verbiage I used before with the just-in-time content for the just-in-time buyer. These customers are on your site, they're browsing for something. Doesn't matter how they got there, right? Their friend could have posted something on social, they saw a social ad, they got an email, but they clicked on it, right? Or they navigated to your site. Something took them there. So they're interested. And you have a couple different examples here. You can just say, hey, we noticed you checking out XYZ product, come back and shop, right? And you're telling them that you're actually tracking them a little bit more, which can be an effective strategy. You can also leave it very generic, make it look like a very well-timed, relevant batch and blast message. And the Lowe's example to the right there, if I'm looking for mulch, I get a message like this that says, here, I look at this and I say, hey, that could be a message on a random Tuesday in springtime, right? It's just a mulch message. It's not telling me I'm looking for mulch. It's just a well-timed message. And they even have product recommendations to boot there, so it's even better. But these are some of the highest performing messages that you have in your arsenal here. And you can see some of the results at the bottom there. So 3% of total email revenue on 0.3% of total email sends, because it's relevant to the consumer. It's at a time where they're actively shopping with you. So these messages are really powerful, but the beauty here is they're automated again, right? You have a couple of emails that you create. You can do it over time. You can get as specific or as wide ranging as you want, but your email team can absolutely execute these things. Third, basket abandonment strategy. So here's the thing. Most people are sending basket abandonment strategies. Chances are it's the most profitable message you send out of your email program. Doesn't mean it can't be better. Think about all the data points that the consumer is giving you when they are identifying specific products they want to buy, right? And it's not an all-inclusive list, but just some of them, right? Is everything in the shopping cart on sale? And does that sale end in 2 days? Well, if so, it changes the entire structure of how your shopping cart abandonment strategy can go, right? As opposed to saying, hey, here's 10% for completing your order. You don't need to do that. You send them a message, hey, sale's ending in 24 hours. Use that sense of urgency to play in there and save yourself some margins. You don't need to, oops, left something in my cart. You don't necessarily need that, right? Sale's going to end. So all these things can certainly dictate the type of messaging. And the SKU I look at are category products. Think about this from example, and certainly it's going to change based on the products you sell. But think about, I once abandoned a dishwasher, right? Because I was shopping for a dishwasher. I don't know the first thing about dishwashers. So I get this email the next day. It's like, oops, you left something in your cart. I'm like, no, it wasn't a mistake. I didn't leave it in my cart because I wasn't ready to buy it, right? But then I get these generic emails that come afterward. Well, if I'm abandoning a pair of shoes, maybe those generic emails work because it's a pair of shoes. But if I'm spending $800 on a dishwasher, my objections or my hesitations of purchasing are much different than a $50 or $100 pair of shoes, right? And this goes for all carts. What do I need to know when I'm shopping for a dishwasher? I need to know about installation services and hallway services. And do I need new tubes, or can I use my existing fittings? These things matter and can be conveyed in that messaging if you know the product I'm abandoning, right? And think about the purchaser at this point as well. Is the person who abandoned that basket Have they never purchased from us before? Have they purchased from us one time and this is their second time coming back? Or have they purchased from us 10 times since last month? Because if they purchased 10 times in the last month, I don't need to give them incentive. I might not even need to send them more than one message because I know they love our brand, right? But for that first time or the never purchaser, I might need to string them along a little bit more. I might need to really reinforce my customer service policies and my satisfaction guarantees. So there's a lot you can do here, and it can certainly change the amount of messages you send, right? It's 1, 2, or 3 messages is your typical best practice. Well, who said you can't send 4 or 5? Of course you can, right? Do you need to send 5 messages for a $20 pair of headphones? No, you don't, probably. I mean, you could, but you probably don't need to. It's probably overkill. But for something that has a longer buying cycle or specific SKUs, maybe you do need to, because there's more things you need to convey at that point. So don't stop at best practices. And these are great messages as it already stands, but you can make it better. And then the last one today is product recommendations. And we talked about consumers expecting better product recommendations. The beauty of product recommendations is you can use them in almost every message you send out of your email program, and they're automated. You put the code in your message one time and boom, you're done, right? You let all that data, you let the backend system process that data and give an output that's relevant to the consumer, taking in, web browsing behavior, purchase behavior, click behavior, all these great things here, and they can make any message, even if you send batch and blast messages, more relevant to them. So here's just a couple examples. The one on the left here, if you take the personalization picks out of the bottom of that message, that's a batch and blast message, right? Which you may be sending anyways. You have some personalized picks down there, which are relevant to my past purchase behavior with that particular site, but that generic message is now more relevant to me. And it doesn't have to be an incentive-laden message like that one. It could just be your standard Tuesday send, but you have some recommendations that are more personal. All of a sudden, that message, which might have been relevant to 15, 20% of your audience, could now be relevant to, or in some cases, extremely relevant to 60 to 100% of them. If they open, they have something in there that gravitates to them. The middle example is just a basket abandon strategy, right? Hey, you left something in your cart. Here's some things based on what's in your cart that you might like as well. And these messages you can craft and turn into just standalone messages that automatically populate that you can send out to people. Now, there are some best practices and pitfalls, which I'm going to get into in just a minute here, with doing messages like that and using recommendations in your messaging. So if you're currently using some, just hang on just for an extra minute for me. But you can use these to automatically populate and get an extra message out the door. So if your team is strapped for resources, boom, you're done in a matter of minutes. Now, here's a great example of the power of recommendations. Here's an example for my son's birthday. So last year he was turning 3. His name is Connor. He's a boy, of course, and you can see, hey, Connor's birthday is around the corner. Must be tough picking out toys for 3-year-old boys, especially if it's not your kid, right? But even if it's your kid, it's still tough. But nephews, nieces, this message is extremely relevant. It's timely, it's automated, it's dynamic content, right? This message as a standalone is great. It engages me. But look at this, 8 recommendations for 3-year-old boys. This message, which was already relevant and engaging, just got a million times better for me. This is the power of recommendations, right? You can speak and make messaging and make your brand stand out even more just by using recommendations that are relevant to the people. So this is a great example of a message that really populates to provide recommendations and provide dynamic content and personalization, and they just took it to a different level. And of course, there's no limit here. Transactional messages, so order confirmations, shipping confirmations. The middle example, post-purchase messaging, right? You've got purchase data to make the recommendation, so even better. And again, you can use these in virtually any message. Now, a couple pitfalls real quick before we wrap up here. So there's 3 things I want to go for just for you: subject lines, irrelevant results, and ways to do generic recommendations, whether you're doing them now or just gonna dip your toe into the water with some generic ones and not user-specific ones. So just for you, subject lines, you probably get these, or you have gotten them in the past. Gregory, products recommended just for you, right? And that's your subject line. You open it up and you might get something like this, right? The problem with using subject lines like that is really about expectations. The overstock example here, I bought an iPhone accessory, but they're touting me stylus pens. Not really compatible at that point, right? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, they're both from a technology section, but they're different products. I don't need stylus pens with my iPhone. And then I've got 2 recommendations for female jewelry in there. Again, not relevant. Now, it's great to try to push me and suggest other categories, but recommendations just for me, never purchase or browse that stuff on your site, so it's not relevant. And the example to the right there, I've got a mix of female and male products. I've got watches and clothing. There's nothing in there for me that is relevant to me. So the next time I get that email from that company that says, Gregory, products recommended just for me, I'm not opening, right? You've burned that bridge because the expectations just didn't set. So even if you are sending messages like this and testing them and you don't have the relevant results, think about the subject line usage, right? Make it a little more generic if you can, so people do come back and open the message, and hopefully you can fine tune your results over time. Irrelevant results is the other one to really look at, and it's okay. Again, it's okay to cross bridges and try to get people from one category to another, but here's a couple examples of, I'm looking at a train set and I've got these 2 phone things in the middle which don't really fit what I'm looking for. And then the example to the right is a $20 pair of headphones, and while you recommend some other headphones for me which are higher price, which is great, I've got a $1,000 television as a recommendation, right? That's not relevant. Again, you're taking electronics section and just jamming something in there. So even if you're hard coding or choosing the recommendations yourselves, make sure they're somewhat realistic to what people are actually shopping for. So again, it didn't turn me off, it didn't ruin the emails, but it certainly didn't help, right? It took those recommendations and made them somewhat moot for me. And then finally, generic recommendations are something you may be doing now. You might be tipping your toe into the water before you get to more personalized recommendations, and there's a right way and a wrong way to do them. So here's an example of some wrong ways, right? So I've got recommended just for me. The upper left example, I've got a pea coat, which is not my style, a pair of shoes, which maybe I'd wear if I'm going to a conference or something, a dress shirt, which matches the other 3, and then a pair of headphones, right? Where do the earbuds come into play here? So not really relevant to me in that it's more like a hodgepodge of things you might think I like. The example below, I've got skinny jeans. You will never catch me wearing skinny jeans in my life, and I've got 1 shirt in there. So again, not relevant to me. And the example off to the right, I've got men's products, I've got female products, I've got a winter hat in there, and of course some summer hats in there. They're not recommended just for me because nothing here matches really anything I would wear minus a hat, but I've never bought a hat, but they seem to think I need 6 hats out of here. So it's incorrect, right? They just didn't set the expectations the right way, and that's what it's all about. And here's how you do it better. If they're generic, that's fine, but think about the terminology you use. Here are some of our favorites, customer favorites, top sellers, staff picks, new items, picks of the month, whatever it can be. You don't have to promise that these are just for them, but it's okay to miss. People will say, yeah, that's okay, you missed because you didn't set the expectation that it's just for products. The upper right example there, recommended products. Well, they're not recommended for me. They're just company recommended products. Maybe they're top sellers, whatever the reason. It's all about expectation setting, and that's really what it comes down to. So generic recommendations or more static, non-individualized recommendations can absolutely work for you. You just need to set the proper expectations. But the beauty of recommendations are, 1, people expect them, and 2, the tools and the data are there to harness and deliver individualized recommendations now, and they can be used in really any message. So when we look at the 4 strategies here, I'm not going to go through all these, but product recommendations, browse recovery, basket abandonment, and welcome series, there's ways you can do from a very streamlined, short resource standpoint on your side to make messaging more better. And the beauty is that you can implement them one at a time. So I'm going to turn over to Chloe here in just a second for questions. But if you want to take a look at some of those retailer reports, if you go to bronzo.com/inside the minds, you can download all 4 reports or just individualized ones from the retailer stand if you want to. But just remember, listen as best you can to your audience. Be a concierge for your customers. If you take that data in, you harness that data, and you output that in a relevant, meaningful way to your customers, they're going to love you for it. So if I leave you with anything today, is to be a concierge for your customers. So thanks for sticking with me. I'm going to turn it over to Chloe now for some questions for you, and we'll go from there.
That's great. Thanks, Greg, for a really detailed presentation and all those insights. We do have some questions that have come in already, but before we start in on our Q&A session, a quick reminder to anyone else who's got a question on how to ask it. On the control panel on your screen, you can see a chat box. Write your question there and press send, and we'll aim to get to as many questions as we can today. So, question 1, Greg. With regard to browser abandonment, my concern is that we will aggravate our customers. They may think we're following them too closely. Is this a legitimate concern?
Thanks for the question. Legitimate concern? I would say yes. It's always a legitimate concern, right? Whether you're bothering your customers or not. Uh, the things I would say is think about again what we saw from the consumer standpoint is one, people are expecting it, but two, some of the strategies behind it, right? You don't have to necessarily say, "Hey, Greg, we saw you checking out these shoes. Come buy them," right? You can leave them more generic. I used to get this pushback when I was doing consulting a lot, and it wasn't so much pushback, but the same question. And what I would always tell them is you're going to send them a message anyways, right? Whether it's your regular Tuesday send or your batch and blast message or whenever your next send's going, you're going to send them a message. So they're going to hear from you. Why not make that message more relevant? And if you're concerned about them thinking you're following them a little too closely, leave it more of a generic promotional message feel. So you're not telling them you're tracking them, use a subject line that's a little more generic. And they're just going to think it's a well-timed message, right? That just-in-time content for the just-in-time buyer terminology we're using. So legitimate concern, but think about you're going to send them a message anyways. Think about how to do it in a respectful way for your customers. But overall, I don't see a lot of pushback, whether it was clients in the UK, Australia, or US I was consulting. I didn't see a lot of pushback from the customers from getting messages like that because they're helpful for them, right? It's if I'm searching for a pair of shoes and you're sending me something specific on shoes, I appreciate that more than it's a turn off for me.
Thanks, Greg. So the second question is, you mentioned intuitive product recommendations a couple of times. We're sending more generic recommendations like top products or best sellers. Is that a bad strategy?
Yeah, and that's it kind of wrapped up with that. So the question probably came in before we got to the end part there. But no, it's not a bad strategy at all, right? It could be extremely effective for a lot of brands, and especially if you don't have the capabilities or you know to make the intuitive recommendations, or you're just not ready to go down that road quite yet. The generic ones can work just great. It's really all about setting the expectations properly, right? So I use the example of, hey, just don't say they're recommended just for me if they're generic recommendations, right? Just use the terminology that's going to set the right expectations. People don't expect it to be perfect, right? You're not perfect, I'm not perfect, and your consumers aren't perfect. But as long as you set the expectation that you're not perfect, that's all that matters. So use some of the terminologies that I showed, like customer favorites or top picks or best sellers or top rated, whatever it might be, and you'll be just fine.
Great, thanks, Greg. Our site's average order value is about £50, so not very high. Would you recommend sending a fewer number of abandoned basket messages than some other retailers who might have higher average order values?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The 50 pounds, it probably depends on the type of products you sell, right? Is that four products that are getting over there, or is it one product that kind of hits around that mark? So it's going to depend a little bit on the products you sell in the buying cycle for there. But the answer ultimately comes down to is maybe, right? Which is a bad answer. Certainly testing it, which I always say testing it is kind of, you should always do it, but it's kind of a consultant's cop out as well. But it's true in this case because the buying cycle might be longer or there might just be more competition. So people are shopping or reading more product reviews. So you might want to send 4 messages there. You might want to send 5 messages. You also might want to send 1 or 2 kind of based on how long the cycle is, the type of product, and maybe you only have a select few SKUs or categories of products where you want to convey more information about that. So the advice I would always give is, if you look at yourself and maybe your two best highest top competitors and say, how do we differentiate from them? How do they differentiate from us? And say one person is shopping for that one product at all 3 of those sites. Why would they choose you? And if you can figure out why they would choose you or why they would choose the other person, your messaging should really overcome that. So have a message that talks about, customer service policies and return policies and how friendly you are and things that would cause someone to not purchase from you and overcome those hurdles and overcome the things that maybe your competitors do better than you. In that case, that will really determine how many messages you send. And those things might go 4 messages and you might find that works extremely well. Those messages might only be 2, and that's okay too, right? You just don't want to waste messages on people. But I can tell you the 4 and 5 messages that I've had clients send in the past have outperformed some of the earlier ones because they just went too soon. But again, if people are buying these things in 2 days, right, it's a quick turnaround decision. No, you probably don't need 4 or 5. So test it out a little bit, but really think about the messaging you want to convey. Don't send the message just to send the message. But really good question. Thank you for that.
That's great. And our last question today, if you're creating a click-based welcome series and they click on multiple links in the first message, how do you handle which message someone would get as the follow-up?
Great crowd today because you're asking a really good question. So that's something I would get a lot, right? And that's really hierarchy is the best way to think about this here. So if you have, and there's two really different approaches, but if you have your hierarchy, say you have 6 links in your navigation bar, and that's usually where people start with the click-based stuff because those are your high-level categories. So they click on link 1 and link 2. Think about the hierarchy. Which link is more important for you as a retailer? Is it to move people and give them more information on link 1 over link 2 because you either sell more of it or it has a higher profit margin, or it's easier to convert them a second time if they purchase from that category? Well, then you want to rank that and say, hey, if they click on this one, let's ignore the other ones and let's get them this message or this series. The other option is, hey, links 1 through 5 are great. Link 6, fewer people click on, but we have a much higher profit margin there. And we know if we can get those people, we will get them for life, right? Or something along those lines. And maybe it's more important from you because you have fewer people clicking, but it's a much more defined target audience. Maybe you want to prioritize that one a little bit more because of the awareness part of it. So there's two different strategies, but really you're just ranking these from a hierarchy standpoint, which is more important for you as a retailer, both short term and long term. And the other thing to think about is, even if you do it that way and link 1 is the product or the message or series you want to send to them, but they click on link 2 and 3 as well, use 2 and 3 as secondary callouts, right, in the next message that comes. Maybe you have secondary or tertiary sections of that message that talk about link 2 stuff and link 3 things. And that's really a good way to approach it. But from a starting standpoint, to make it simplified for your email team, just think about what's more important for you and just work your way down the list from that standpoint.
That's great. And as I said, that was our last question today. So, Greg, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd like to end by thanking you all for taking part, listening to the webinar, asking your questions. I'd also like to thank our speaker, Greg Zakowicz, Senior Commerce Marketing Analyst at Bronto Software. Greg, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun.
That's great. And as always, we'll follow up by email with a link to the on-demand webinar, which you can listen again to at your convenience. So thank you once again for taking part in this webcast, which was in association with Bronto Software. Thank you and goodbye.